New RPG dropping, one of the most anticipated ones of the year. Creators of Ori and the Blind Forest doing an action RPG, no rest for the wicked. My name is Preach, and I was one of the lucky people, one of about 20 streamers that were allowed to play the beginnings of the game. It went out to, like, select streamers only because there's still things that aren't finished and they didn't want them showing off yet. So we had quite a bunch of rules, like, don't show the main menu yet. It's not finished. That's fine. That's totally fine, which is why they didn't put it out to the general public. But it is coming out in April on early access for people to widespread play. This was an exciting one because Ori and the Blind Forest and its sequel is so good, and the atmosphere that they create, every image, and they stress this, every time you look at the screen, it should look like a painting, which is what it does, and they've got so much good faith over at Moon that we want to. I was excited. I was super excited for this. So what is it, and how does it work? So you are put onto a world. You are shipwrecked onto an island where you're trying to reach the major city. In the preview they showed to the game, the major city is going to be a very big deal, that you can actually buy land, upgrade, decorate, do whatever the hell you want to this city and become a big deal there. We're not going to get to the city in this playthrough. What we're going to do essentially is chapter 1, which leads to the first major boss, and this has vibes of Metroidvania, Path of Exile, all Dark Souls, all that kind of combat that you have played in the past, put in the absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous style that you expect from these developers. So what we're going to focus on here is the gameplay and the atmosphere and the area that you're in, because that's the most important thing that we expect from them, and to see how well they pulled it off. TLDR, it's phenomenal how this game looks and feels and plays. It's really good. But let's get into some more specifics. It is an RPG, but you don't choose a class. It's based entirely on the weapons that you equip. So those of you who played something like Guild Wars will have a similar vibe to this, as your weapons give you whole new movesets that you utilize in very different ways. And you can hold 2 of them at the moment. So you can have, say, Sword and Board. You can have a giant claymore, you can have a mage staff, which will then give you fireball, AoE fire, and there's going to be a ton more coming. I never found, no matter how much I tried, I did not find a bow. I wanted to try ranged elements. You do create your own world, like as you load into the game. If you played Pal World recently, you know exactly what I'm talking about, is you create that environment that's for you, and the loot within that world is RNG. So you would get very different stuff in your second playthrough, very different stuff on your third playthrough, etc. You'll get epic items, you'll get legendary items that'll be totally different. But the actual pace of the game should remain very much the same. You unlock some certain professions: woodcutting, mining, fishing, but they've not done it in a tedious way. This isn't going to be a bit like the early days of New World, where you're like, okay, so now I spend the next 5-6 hours chopping trees and things like that. No. Once you chop a tree, it is fallen down. You've got the resource from that. Once you find a fishing spot, they're very set fishing spots in the game. You fish once, you get the fish, and that fishing spot is done. That's it. It's not going to be like a big mini game sort of process, which I know some people like. But for my purposes of continuing on the adventure, again, the pacing of, like, you're supposed to be adventuring, probably not spending your day fishing. So they've limited it in that fashion. As you find a fishing spot, you utilize it, and then that one's done. And there's plenty of them around. A shovel, occasionally, if you're paying attention. This is a big deal in this game, is you have to pay attention to the environment. There are secrets, and thankfully they kind of showed us in the preview video that they put out to the entire public of, like, what these kind of look like. If you see a wall that's made of wood, you can probably break it, and there's going to be something behind there. More on that later, because it actually leads to very cool stuff. But you might find, like, digging spots. A little glimmer on the soil will reveal a digging spot, and if you've got a shovel, you can dig that up and get the stuff out of it that you want, which might lead to more keys, which open other areas, etc, etc, etc. So a lot of this going on. One thing that's really cool about this: separate inventories. One inventory for resources, one inventory for armor. So if it's not just one universal inventory. I loved this, because if you were collecting a lot of armor and you might want to save some of it for later, or this works better with a different build, that's fine. You've got that over here, and it's not conflicting with the fact that you're gathering a lot of resources and wood and stone and gems and things like that for crafting later. That goes somewhere else. So you can be a bit more picky about what you're carrying in one inventory and leave free space in the other one for more stuff you want to collect. I like that we started getting epic armor from the beginning, and really already in the level 1 era, learning what things we would like. For example, I found a chest that gave me less health but more regen and things like that. I was like, okay, do I want that right now? Maybe. Let me try that out. Oh, it's too heavy. Like, I've got a really strong armor, but it's too heavy. And that's when the talent system came in. So they do have a basic talent system, but because it's not class-based, because that's based on your weapons, it's based on what kind of playstyle you prefer. So would you lean heavily towards, say, two-handers and heavy armor? Okay, you probably want to put more points into strength and also equip load, so you can build that style up. Are you more into light armor and casting, so you probably want to put more points into, say, faith or intelligence, so that you can utilize some of the weapons. A lot of the weapons that dropped in the first tier did have some requirements, so I found some swords that required, like, dex and faith. I want to try those out. The daggers required different things, but very limited. And you get points every time you level that you can put anywhere. So I started moving them around a lot. I was like, okay, I feel like I need more stamina for my dodge rolls, so I can do a couple of attacks and move back out, because the combat is very fast-paced, and you do have to recognize the tells that the enemy's doing to know what it's going to do. You do want to learn each of the enemies, even the trash enemies that are around, as to what their attack patterns are. Really cool. So I was like, okay, I want more stamina, so I'll put more in stamina, but I found a really nice armor, but I can't wear it because it's too heavy, or I have to take something else off, so I'll put some more points in equip load. I'm leaning towards this weapon, so I'll use a little bit more in there, and I was mooching around. I'm sure there will be min-maxed Baldur's Gate 3 style builds, but for the most part, in the early game, I could do whatever the hell I wanted to try out all the different weapons. Now, I mostly favor big, solid, smorking two-handers. I've always done that, and I found an epic claymore. Yes, I found myself an epic claymore, which suited me right down to the ground, and it was so heavy I had to put a dress on, and I was immediately into my Dark Souls characters, which usually has a giant weapon and no armor, and we smash and smork our way to victory. I was a very happy boy, although I did try out every single different weapon, which comes with new abilities. Your abilities on the weapons are kind of cool. So what you have in the top left is this orange bar that's filling up. This is your focus meter. As you're attacking, you will generate this focus, which once you have enough of it, and it's not like one bar equals one ability, each of the special abilities requires a different amount of focus, is by holding down like right trigger for your right weapon or left trigger for your left weapon, you will unlock its 4 abilities. Some weapons only have 1. It depends on the rarity and the quality of the weapon. Some weapons have 4 abilities. So the mage staff, like I explained earlier, will have Fireball, Blink, and also the ability to AoE fire along the floor. Or my Claymore had like a rush juggle attack. The dagger had quick strikes and thrusting abilities, things like that. And then you'll utilize the focus for a big special flourish once you fit it in. So really enjoyed that style as well. Let's talk about this environment before we come back to the bosses and my big fat claymore. The environment is utterly gorgeous. Like, the weather will be dynamic, and you can see how much the weather changes what you're doing. Whether it's water running down the trees, or the sun's out and it's beautiful. Throughout most of my playthrough, it was raining in the environment I was in. And you're constantly looking, and they use a fixed camera system intentionally, because they do want to create that terrifying atmosphere of what lurks around the corner. I didn't particularly find this obtrusive. There were occasions when I was shimmying and trying to find the one of millions of secrets that are even in this first area, to turn the camera so I could see what I was looking at, and they don't let you. And that's intentional, because they want you to make sure, for sure, definitely, that you can see the way they want you to go, because it creates the best atmosphere and look for the game. Maybe less practical a little bit, but everything makes sense once you figure it out, and it also allows them to obscure secrets a little bit better. You can still definitely, once you see it, you're like, oh yeah, it's definitely there. But on initial impression, it might be slightly obscured, and it's about paying attention to what the hell is going on. So the castle that I dealt with in the first area had several locked doors that required certain keys, and levers that needed to be found, and things that could be broken, like floor that could be broken, and things like that. As I was mooching around there, it became very apparent that this castle not only had, like, many points of ingress. Like, I could have attacked this. Once I'd fully uncovered it, I was like, wow, I could have come at this place in like 5 or 6 different ways to arrive at the actual main point that obviously the story wants you to get to, but you had so many choices to go around, and you're only going to find them by fully exploring. But fully exploring is very rewarding. There are tons of chests around if you go looking for them, dig sites, all these kind of things that you want to be finding, because they give you more loot, more chances for loot, more resource, more food. There's cooking in the game, but again, it's not obnoxious. One thing I really liked is once you've discovered a recipe, which you can either find in chests or you can buy from NPCs, is that when you say, I want to cook everything, it just does it. It's not like one at a time or anything like that. It just makes it for you, and then you have good food that's used instantly in combat. It just has a cooldown, but it will heal you up either over time or straight away. Really liked this because it felt like more like a health potion than anything else, and they gave you plenty of resources, so I never ran out of healing materials. I was concerned later on, is like, okay, if I fight something really hard, am I going to run out of food, essentially, to heal, because I need that, and it doesn't. It seems like they've accounted for that very, very well. So loved that entirely. I approached, going back to the bosses then, so we only had, they asked us, like, please play it for 90 minutes, because that should give you the entire Chapter 1 experience, but play longer if you want. This was the rules they gave us, like, play longer if you want. However, after you kill the main boss of the area, if you try and go forward, we're going to give you, like, an end screen. We don't want you to go, because the next place is probably the city. We're not ready to show that yet. So it'll give you an end screen, and you will go back to the character creation. That will be that play session over at that point. So they told us quite upfront, it's like, if you really want to keep playing and exploring, and we recommend you do, because you will not have seen everything in 90 minutes, is kill the boss, but just don't go forward. Like, they specifically said, don't go over the bridge. And I'm like, okay. Encountering the first boss. We did see the boss in the preview video, so I already had an idea of what its attack patterns were from watching someone else, but obviously it's very different when you play it. But what I noticed in the video is that you can parry the boss, and I'm a sucker for parrying bosses. I love it. Whatever the action RPG is, if I can, like, counter it with a smooth parry, oh, I love that. So I rock up. I've got my claymore. I know the boss is here. You can tell it's like builds up. There's corpses everywhere as you lead up to it, and it looked like the environment in the video. So I was like, okay, there's a boss coming, and there's a checkpoint nearby. I will say, this isn't like Souls. Once you find a checkpoint, which you can freely use to heal yourself back to full, it doesn't respawn the enemies in the area. So I imagine this is designed so they can kind of control your leveling. If you're not an explorer, well, let's just say this. If you are an explorer, you will gain, obviously, more experience from killing more enemies than if you didn't do that. But what you can't do is, like, respawn the area and farm over and over again, which a lot of people did in Souls. Like, a lot of people in their first playthrough would reset the Undead Burg over and over again because it's relatively easy, and just keep re-clearing to gain more experience, more levels. You can't do that here. If you hit a checkpoint, you can freely reuse it, even sometimes to the detriment of the game. There was an area that I found that was near the checkpoint, which had some very nasty enemies in it, and they couldn't cross water, and the checkpoint was next to the water. So I could go over the water, heal up, come back and keep fighting them, and they would just wait for me to come back. So you might want to be a bit careful of people finding checkpoint abuses like that. Let's go to the boss. I wanted to parry the boss. Watch the health bar of the boss. I did not watch the health bar of the boss because I was fully focused on his animations to time the parries. So this is the first time I'd really tried parrying, so missed a couple, then started landing them, started to get the rhythm of it. It turns out my claymore, I checked it after I killed the boss, because I killed it in like 3 hits. I was like, huh. The weapon I had found had a massive damage bonus on parry. And so my parries decimated this boss. And so I was like, oh god, I absolutely crushed it. Now this was part luck because of the weapon I got, but also a good reward for you doing the fight in a clever way instead of just avoiding and picking and poking at it. And I felt really good about it. It wasn't disappointing even though I smashed the boss to pieces. It was more a case of, oh, that's cool because I worked with the weapon system I had. I would find another weapon that maybe like perfect dodges do something or something along those lines. Or if you can get good uptime, you do bonus damage. There'd be all these kinds of things. So it worked well for the tools I had. It was just accidental that I did it because I didn't read the weapon fully. I saw something on parry, but I didn't understand. More realistically, I didn't understand what 40 damage really translated into. But it wrecked the boss. It absolutely destroyed him. So boss destroyed. I was like, okay, this game is absolutely phenomenal. Let's do some more exploring, because I know many of you in RPGs like, well, how much can you explore? Is it going to be a bit like FF16, which is not really worthwhile, or is it going to be something to go and see? It's something you want to go and see. It turned out there was like 3 times more content if you bothered to look around than if you just carried on with the main story, which is what I want to see. This is a very densely packed first zone. Very, very densely packed. I found a whole swamp area to the south, which had a whole bunch of new stuff in it and new weapons and harder enemies than the boss. interestingly enough, I found that really cool. Like, if you go off the beaten path, you find some very tough enemies that can shred you to pieces real quick. Particularly because I didn't have a shield at that time. And it turned out if I had a shield, I would have been way more effective against these enemies. So again, keeping a variety of weapons on hand is probably a smart idea in order to deal with certain types of enemies. I then noticed near the checkpoint, which I alluded to earlier, there was another one of these wooden walls. Smashing through there gave me possibly the most exciting bit of combat I've had so far. Inside there was a monstrously gargantuan enemy with basically a tree that he was hitting me with and could kill me in 2 hits. So I was like, okay, now we've got ourselves a boy. At this point, I felt like I was overpowered with the claymore, so I was like, I've got to try out the different weapons to see what they're like. So I switched to daggers. We'll fight with this. Why was this so exciting? Their giant enemies don't have obnoxiously fast tracking. Okay, if that doesn't make sense to you because you've not played many of these games, the tracking is a problem that the Souls series has had for a while, in that players have got pretty good, and players are getting better and better every time they play through one of their games, and the Souls series has now, what, like 7 games in its arsenal, essentially, if you include Sekiro, etc. And the way they've countered that to keep the difficulty curve up is monstrously large enemies, which should be unwieldy and not very agile, are crazy agile. They will follow you like it's unbelievable. It's like a spinning top. They will just follow you everywhere and strike down with you, so that the only way you can counter their attacks is with perfectly timed rolls, rather than you being smart. If you fight a giant monolithic enemy, you should be able to use your smaller agility to get around them so they can't hit you properly. And it does that in this game. Oh my god, I was so happy. I was so happy. If I maneuver properly to his back, he can't just spin 180 and just crush me into the ground. No, if he's starting his attack and he's wound up his attack and he's smashing the floor, which will kill me, but I've managed to get into a better position or I've rolled to the side or whatever, he can't just turn and hit me immediately. He will have to turn on the proper axis of a giant enemy, giving you a really good opportunity to attack. Meaning that the way you fight this giant enemy is actually to get up close and personal. Watch what he's going to do, maneuver properly, and then you'll have a far easier time defeating him because you're outplaying this giant gargantuan monster. I was so happy. This was so glorious. I was like, thank God, because so many games now are like, here is massive enemy of crushing, and he also has the agility of Spider-Man. No, that doesn't make sense. That's not how this should work. He's giant. Of course he can't just spin like a ballet dancer, right? I expect that from an agile light boss, even if they're huge, like the Dancer in Dark Souls 3. That makes a lot of sense. But when I'm gianting a Colossus that's swinging literally a tree around, no, that's probably not what should happen. And that's not what happens. I was so thankful for this. But this was a whole secret area. There was no reason for me to go here other than like, ooh, there's a wall. Let's go and check it out. Beyond that, I then saw from up on a cliff line that I also explored that there was a whole town below me that I hadn't been to yet. It was filled with enemies and things like that. I was like, okay, now there's a whole other town that I haven't been to. Let's go and see what's in there. This was the majority of the rest of my playthrough, probably like 45 minutes or so, because finding how to get into here, I don't think is possible. I think that you are supposed to... my guess is that once you go to the town... Looking at the map and the layout of this castle is that you can actually come back into this area later on, and it opens up shortcuts. There are plenty of shortcuts to find in the game, dropping ladders down, things like that, that will open up and freely allow you to traverse the area later on after you've found certain areas. But this was... we did find some sneaky stuff. They definitely borrowed from the Souls style and other games of if you activate the lift but then get off the lift, it will rise up and you can get underneath the lift, finding more tunnels and a downward area. I just couldn't find the way up into the actual town, and I really tried. The fall damage here is done very specifically. You cannot fall very far, at least at this point, unless you find some sort of ring of falling. And that is intentional, so you can't just cheese your way into other areas. They're definitely thinking about ways that, like, speedrunners or whatever will probably try and just bypass areas or get to areas you're not supposed to be yet. So there'll always be a way. They will always find a way, but at least for the moment, they're trying to counter that. It's like, yeah, you're not supposed to be here till later on. Although you can see it, and you can maybe get in there. I didn't find a way, let's put it that way. But needless to say, after doing the story, there was 3 more areas to fully explore that I hadn't seen, that were off the beaten path, hidden by secrets, all that kind of stuff. So all the elements there are probably what you want. The combat is tight and fluid. It looks gorgeous. Happy. Very happy. Really looking forward to this one. Usually I play when the full game is released and not the early access without everything else, but we'll see on this one. We'll see. So that's No Rest for the Wicked. Go and check it out. I'll see you in a bit, guys. Bye-bye.